The morning Caesar died, I was thinking about a cracked bowl, not war, not politics, not the whispers that had been crawling through Rome for weeks like rats through grain. A bowl with a crack in it that I kept meaning to replace. That is what was in my head when the most powerful man in the world walked past me for the last time. My name is Marcus. You will not find it anywhere, not on a monument, not in a history scroll, not scratched into any wall in Rome. I was not important enough to record and not invisible enough to forget, at least not to myself. I was a soldier, Praetorian Guard, attached to the security detail of the Roman Senate. My job was simple: stand at the door, look dangerous, let the right people through, keep the wrong people out. For 3 years I did this without incident. Then came the Ides of March. I want to tell you what that morning felt like because nobody ever asks. Rome had a smell in those days, bread and animal dung, and the smoke of 1,000 cooking fires all pressed together by the heat. By the time the sun was fully up, the city was already loud. Merchants, slaves, senators, soldiers, everyone moving, everyone with somewhere to be. But that morning had something underneath it. A tension, like the air before a storm when the birds go quiet and you don't notice until you realize you haven't heard anything for a while. I noticed it on the walk to my post. I couldn't name it. I put it down to bad sleep and kept walking. Caesar arrived late. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The man was famous for his punctuality, obsessive about it. The way men who control everything tend to be obsessive about the few things they can actually control. Time was one of his. So when he came up the steps of the Theatre of Pompey 20 minutes behind schedule, I looked at him more carefully than usual. He was tired, not weak. Julius Caesar did not do weak, not in public, not ever, but tired in the way a man looks when his mind has been fighting something all night and hasn't won. I found out later why. His wife, Calpurnia, had begged him not to come. She had wept. She had dreamt the night before of a statue running with blood, and she had held onto his arm at the door of their home and told him, please do not go today. He had almost listened. A man named Decimus Brutus, one of the conspirators, though Caesar didn't know that yet, had shown up at his house that morning specifically to make sure that he came. Told him the Senate would think him a coward, told him the postponement would look weak. Caesar straightened up and came. As he reached the top of the steps, he passed a man named Spurina in the crowd below, a soothsayer. Weeks earlier, Spurina had warned him, beware of the Ides of March. Caesar had laughed it off the way powerful men laugh off things they don't want to hear. But now, here was Spurina, and here were the Ides, and Caesar was apparently in a mood to be clever about it. He called down to him, the Ides of March have come, meaning your warning was wrong, and I'm still here. Spurina looked at him and said, hi, they have come. They have not yet gone. Caesar smiled, walked through the entrance. I closed the door behind him. Then I waited. That is the job. That has always been the job. You wait, and you watch, and you listen for something wrong, and usually there's nothing wrong, and you go back home and eat dinner and do it again tomorrow. I had done this hundreds of times. The meeting had been going about an hour when the senator I didn't recognize approached the door and told me Caesar had requested I moved to the far end of the corridor to give the session more privacy. I thought nothing about it. Senators are always reorganizing guards like furniture. So I moved. I know now that was deliberate. I was being relocated, tidied out of the way. I stood at the far end of the corridor and I looked at the wall and I thought about the bowl. Then the shouting started. I have heard many kinds of shouting in my life. The competitive shouting of debate, the theatrical shouting of men performing anger for an audience, the drunk shouting of soldiers after a campaign. This was none of those. This was something I had no category for. It came through the stone walls, muffled and strange, but the frequency of it, the pitch, that traveled perfectly. It was the sound of men who had stopped pretending. I was moving before I had decided to move, down the corridor and already on the door, and then it burst open from the inside and they came pouring out. Senators, dozens of them, white togas, wide eyes, some running, some stumbling, some frozen in the doorway, unable to process the instruction to flee. One of them grabbed my arm as it passed. Gaius Casca. I didn't know his name then. He had blood on his hand, not a wound, the wrong distribution for a wound. And they looked at me for one full second with an expression I still cannot entirely describe. Not guilt, not fear, something more complicated than either. Then it was gone. I went in. The room was chaos, then it wasn't. The senators had fled so quickly that the overturned chairs and scattered scrolls seemed to have been abandoned mid-sentence. The air smelled like copper. At the far end of the room, at the base of the statue of Pompey, the man Caesar had defeated and chased to his death, the man whose ghost apparently had a sense of occasion, at the base of that statue, Caesar had fallen. He had been stabbed 23 times. I stood there and counted the wounds later, and I have wished ever since that I hadn't, because now I cannot uncount them. 23. Physicians determined only one was fatal, which means 22 of those cuts were men making absolutely certain that he died. There were 60 conspirators in that room, 60 men who knew, and on the day, 23 of them drove the point home personally. He had pulled his toga over his face near the end. That is the detail that has never left me. In his final moments, Julius Caesar, dictator, general, the man who crossed the Rubicon, who conquered Gaul, who bent the Rome world until it bent back, pulled his own toga over his face. For dignity, or for darkness, or because he recognized Brutus among the men stabbing him and decided he had seen enough. We will never know which. What I know is that he covered his own face with his own hands, and that was how I found him. I was questioned, of course, multiple times over the following weeks. As Rome descended into the chaos that followed, the answers I gave were always the same because the truth was always the same. I stood at the door. I was moved. I came back. I went in. That was it. That was the full extent of my involvement in the most consequential murder in Western history. The investigators nodded and moved on to more useful witnesses. I was, as I had always been, beside the point. The conspirators believed they were saving Rome. Brutus believed it genuinely. I think that matters, actually, that he believed it. He thought that removing Caesar would restore the Republic, return power to the Senate, correct the tilt of things. What happened instead was the opposite of everything they intended. The assassination did not restore the Republic, it ended it. The civil wars that followed were brutal and long, and when the dust finally settled, Rome had its first emperor, Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, who became Augustus and held power for 40 years. The thing they killed Caesar for to prevent became the permanent condition of Rome within a generation. History does that sometimes, the people making it aim at one thing and strike something else entirely. I'm an old man now. I have had 40 years to sit with what I saw in that room. I have thought about whether I should have opened the door sooner, whether I would have changed anything, whether one guard with one spear against a room full of senators who have been planning this for months, whether that arithmetic ever comes out differently. I don't think it does, but I think about it. I think about Calpurnia weeping at the door that morning and him choosing to leave anyway. I think about Sporina in the crowd below and the smile Caesar gave him. I think about Casca's hand on my arm and the thing on his face that wasn't quite cute. I think about a cracked bowl I never replaced. The morning the world changed, this was what I had in my head. I have never decided whether that makes me human or whether it makes me a coward. Maybe those are the same thing. My name is Marcus. You have never heard of me, but I was standing right there.